Hello. Today I would like to work with you on the Appassionata. It's a famous sonata, but first thing by Beethoven, it was not named so, of course. Only les adieux, the farewell. Not the Tempest, nor the Moonlight. So in fact, no program sonata music beyond the form except the Appassionata. And the Appassionata was not named by him either, but there is a sense of purpose in that sonata, a sense of urgency in that sonata, a sense of focus on a one-track idea. Dark, driven, you have the mysterious opening, the second theme, the Tempest, part of it, and then the anguish. The repeated note is a call of death in the symbolism of the Baroque music for the toll of the church bells, announcing the death or something anguishing. And at the same time, the F minor as a tonality, as a color more than a tonality, something dark, brooding, that nothing can distract you from. There is not a second theme that could have been more contrasting, as Haydn taught him to do. In Mozart's Sonata K310, written after his mother's death, accordingly to the historians, you have a similar dramatic departure entrance without even introduction like here. But the second theme in Mozart, in a childish way perhaps, the recollection of his own happiness as a child, since it was after the dramatic death of his mother in Paris. But here we don't have a more fluffy, happy, superficially distracting from the drama, the tragic, the fate of the F minor. And I think because of the word passion, which originally is the death of, therefore, before the pain of Christ carrying the cross, then that passion became the meaning of something that excludes everything else, where you only think through what, would it be an ideology, a religion, an opinion, or research, or a passion for animals, or a passion for a person, excluding all others. In other words, no rationale. And that's why I think the first movement of the Appassionata is all about one single track-minded, driven and dark thoughts, storytelling. In many aspects, the first sonata, Opus 2, number 1, has also F minor as a tonality, and also an arpeggio is a metaphoric symbolism for the first theme, which is in fact a non-theme. A theme should be something, is a thematic, something that you can recognize. An arpeggio is, by essence, not something striking the attention because it's generic, but to do a thematic material of a generic arpeggio, he already did it earlier with his first sonata, I think also inspired by the Mozart Symphony No. 40 finale. But it could be not inspired, it's just not even a borrowing, most likely just it's in the air. The point of the story is that in the Appassionata, you have to be driven by some very important single dark aim. And dark because of the color, the atmosphere. And when you have arpeggio, which is relatively blunt, but then you have the very urgent, the bridge to the second theme in relative major. He uses the repeated note. So the symbolism in Baroque of death, because of the death call, the toll of the church bell, okay, that's possible. But I don't think that is the case here. Cantata number 8, Bach uses it. Ich sterbe, the death, in German. No, I think here is the urgency. Mozart in his quartet in D minor uses it. But to go back to the opening, many thoughts come to mind, as you see. I try to keep my trend of thoughts. It's in F minor, therefore it's dark by essence compared to, even if after Baroque, the classic term of the early Viennese school, as we call it, the first one. Major minor has some meaning with the mood, but not that much, like first prelude by Bach, the second inverted in their modes, or instead of, and this, instead of, it's only towards the 19th century Romantic era, well, though it's not so far away, that the minor becomes really the tragic and the major is the hopeful. And then you have the minor and the major, and the minor and the major, when you have a little bit of both, like the second theme in the first sonata with the minor and the major. Here you have a minor, and then you have the shake, vibrato, the intense shake, it's no other word than that, possibly quick ostinato, but not an embellishment, measured trill, frill. No, it's more about something that is like a vibrato, and then at the same time a shake of the soul, but he does it with a D natural. Now there is no D natural in F minor. He should have done to remain really dark in the F minor, completely. But the D being the major sixth of the ascending minor, the top is major, the bottom is minor. And so you have this intensity through the trill that insists on that slight duality. It's in minor, but the 6 degrees major. It doesn't make it happy, but it makes it just enigmatic, just like Mona Lisa. This kind of enigmatic smile, but it's dark. Take the last sonata by Schubert. In the most radiant possible B-flat major choice of tonality. And the first end stop, the dominant, we have the trill, but in minor. Of the B-flat minor descending. So here we have a major sonata with a minor trill that symbolizes something that is under the smile dramatic. And here is the opposite. You start dramatic and you have enigmatic smile. So I think the subtle changes of mood or duality of characters are expressed here very clearly. There is no introduction. You don't have like... You don't start it as a statement. You start it more like entering by insinuation. You don't know where you're going. What is that? It's like dark. D flat, the dominant D flat. It should have been fully major since the dominant is D flat major, but no. There is this minor sixth when the major third, again the minor major, and not fully major, not a fully minor, but in Opus 78 he does the same. A sharp, A natural, duality, major, minor. But the minor prevails through the diminished 7. So it's only the third trill that is fully minor. When the first one was half major or half minor. Which way you want to look at it. And then finally, with a leading tone, but still in minor. So besides the arpeggio as a material, you have repeated notes, the representation of knocking. The knock is something that calls us, that shakes us, that calls, that in fact alarms us. What happened? Who is it? What is going to happen? He did a whole symphony on this. It would have been very lame to do a symphony, though beautiful by itself, but the repeated note here too, and again, and then again arpeggio for the bridge. Which ends the exposition, and then we have the same first theme which was until now exposed pianissimo, mysterious, not soft in the sense of lack of density. It's more like far away, but still very driven. And here we have it. Of course, it's violent and it's syncopated and it's chordal. You can imagine Beethoven composing it with a pencil in the mouth and, well, not a pencil, but anyway, just symphonically trying to get from the instrument recently established at the fortepiano, specifically the fortissimo pianissimo. And he writes pianissimo until the last 16th note. Not even a crescendo into the fortissimo. To shake you, to as a listener, let alone the performer, to surprise you, to provoke in you a sense of intense shock, psychological shock. We take dynamic contrasts for granted, but coming in that time period where most of the music didn't for keyboard use that is in effect. We had articulation, delay, expression. We had the arpeggiation as a spreading of the harmonic projection, something like a blossoming of the sound, but we didn't have that contrasting dramatic effect. I mean, it's psychologically disturbing. Of course, time periods are nothing so obvious than that. After all, when we study them and we teach them, we always think of them like these distinct periods that somehow took forever to develop, blossom, and perhaps transition to the next one. Between Bach's death in 1750 and Chopin's death in 1849, there's only 99 years between the end of Baroque and the blossoming of Romanticism. Therefore, Classicism is sort of inside 99 years, mostly in Vienna, established in a sonata form by Haydn with two supposedly contrasting themes, unlike in the Appassionata, where everything is single color atmospherically. That the second theme is the same rhythm delayed quarter note of the 16th note escaped in arpeggios. The only dim light is that it's relative major, but it's not a contrastic theme by excellence, which is exactly what Haydn wanted most people to study, and how to make contrasting become together again unified in the recapitulation after the development. So Beethoven here is like single track minded. And I think that is very important to understand, because most pianists, when they have to deal with the now technical aspects of playing the piano compared to these musical ideas about mood, atmosphere, symbolism of this or that, notes, repeated, arpeggios, chords, syncopations, trills, major, minor, halfway or full way. Passion is pain, or passion is something that drives you. Okay, all these are words and concepts. They're necessary, because you have to have some kind of meaning to what you want to play. But then when you have to play it, how do you play, for instance, trill is a shake. You cannot do it by lifting the fingers, because then it will sound tiki 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 ta ta, very much like something that distracts you by its superficiality compared to if you want to keep it in a dark moment. So you have to play inside the keys before they repeat fully, but just a little before, so that they don't fully die and then fully replay. They replay before they're fully gone, compared to, or even with the pedal, but inside the keys. As if the fingers are magnetically connected to the keys, and they just quickly, and you obtain that sort of like a shake. Another thing is, how do you obtain the repeated notes? Most pianists are worried about they won't repeat. So the technical aspect of it gets separated from the musical. It's like soul from the body, or meaning from the gesture, or intent from the solution of it, or just separating the how from the why. In this case, you have to put them together and then find a way technically to perform it in that meaning. So these repeated notes could have been trills. But he already used the trill in the first page. So he needs something more alarming, which is the repeated note. And most pianists, because they're afraid he won't repeat, they start lifting the finger in order to repeat it fully, and it becomes, by the staccato, which in Italian means chopped, it's exactly what it is. It becomes a character. So the staccato becomes funny. Operatic laugh. It's nothing to do. It's a repeated note. Does never indicate staccato. Not even the publishers, not even the editors of Urtext, which shouldn't exist since Urtext is the original text, but the editors decide how original to keep what, which pedal Beethoven suggested, where he didn't, and all that. And therefore they decide which fingering, and mostly they decide what articulation. But they don't write staccato. Beethoven didn't write staccato either. So it's an alarming repeated note. The ostinato. And if you use the same finger, after 6 of the repeated notes, your arm gets tense and therefore stiff. And when you get stiff, you don't repeat them. But if you change the fingers, then you have to lift a lot, and then it becomes ta 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 ta. In other words, it's the value that's repeated, but not the articulation that needs to become tongue like an instrument with wind. Some kind of continuum within the repeated notes. So the ideal thing would be to slide the fingers to glide on the keys, and use the natural resonance of the instrument without the pedal, but don't try to make it dry and separate it like staccato that becomes character funny. It's because these repeated notes are, it's a bridge, it's not even the next theme. You need to bring the listener to immediately understand that something is anguishing. And not? Because then you cut the continuum of that dramatic, passionate movement that started here, that bloomed, that exploded, that had the shaking trills, and then because pianists are afraid of the repeated notes not to repeat, and they don't care about the character change, because first thing first, repeat the notes. The action is heavy, I understand. It has to be very played on the edge of the key in order to repeat because of the action. Responsiveness. And then there is something more important, is the right hand. It has this kind of minor thirds that are supposed to establish the repeated notes credentials. Like, and what do? We have an poggiatura. It comes from the dotted rhythm, which is quarter tied to 16th note, on the same note, as if you don't care about the melody. You cannot do that. You need some melody, even if it's an arpeggio or the trill. So you can have neighboring notes, arpeggios, and thirds. Here the thirds are played together, but the repeated note is the one that's the alarming one. 2, 3, 4, 1. And because of this section where the beats are omitted purposely by the composer, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. We all play, we shouldn't, but we end up by playing the leftover 8th note staccato like some kind of joke, because it becomes that by the connotation of the staccato. But it's not funny. It's not like it become from tragic to become comic all of a sudden in a bridge to the second theme. If he had written fully arpeggiated, presented appoggiaturas, he would have done on each beat. Then each resolution 8th note, 3rd, 6th, 9th and 12th 8th note would be a resolution, but it wouldn't be staccato. But because he omits the appoggiatura quarter note and 3, 4, it has to be played as if it's there but missing. So its absence is making it even more anguishing. It shouldn't be tenuto either, it should be just an 8th note, not a tenuto, not a staccato. Because again, connotation to moods. It has to remain constantly in that section in expectations. It is on a dominant, on an ostinato, on repeated notes, and it lacks the downbeats. It only has the resolutions. It's like as if somebody speaks to you only with the last syllables of words. To, yes, go there, I don't know what. And you say, what's happening? It should be everything but reassuring. Or fingers first, music after, because it's not practical. Yes, it can be found a way to be solved. Again, repeated notes by gliding and scratching the fingers on the edge. So you don't have staccato, but ta-ta-ta-ta repeated notes. What a difference with... Therefore, it incorporates itself in the meaning of the opening. These 8th notes, the same 8th notes here. So don't let anybody play all of a sudden faster because of the repeated notes and change of mood, because there's no change of mood. No, it's the same tempo. That's a better octave. Because of unity of the form that prevails by the sonata form on the character issues of contrasting themes, especially when here they are purposely not so contrasting. So I don't know how much if I play the left hand, the first theme, and the second theme in the right hand. Similar, inverted in relative major, with the two hands together, in octaves in the opening. And this beginning is very striking because he starts with the both hands playing just the melody naked, without harmonization. It's not. He didn't have to do that, but he sometimes did use this Alberti bass or a chord. That would have been also very dramatic and like Mozart, the repeated chords. But he doesn't. He just takes it like naked melody without harmonization, naked in that sense. Here the second theme is harmonized. So it's almost soothing. No, he doesn't, and he chooses when to be empty, meaning only the octave, and when to be filled with a minor F minor triad. Just the contrast of forte and piano, which is obviously the instrument and obviously the symphonic translation on the keyboard instrument of his musical collisions and sometimes fragmentations to him. Which are usually played by different orchestra sections. You would have the woodwinds and you have the tutti or the strings. And in the piano, you play all of them. You play and this and that, and you shouldn't be playing one after the other. You should hear them at the same time as two conflicting entities. So you have the chord, at the same time you have the... It's not forte and piano, it's forte piano. And it's very difficult to do because in the second theme, as soon as he rises on the second octave, he does exactly the opposite of what he did in the first theme when he does from pianissimo, downbeat fortissimo. Here it's in the second theme, it's mezzo forte after a crescendo, and downbeat piano. So it's either pianissimo fortissimo, or either is it mezzo forte piano. And most pianists try to give it a chance to be heard because obviously the one overshadows the other when they are so quickly paced within a 16th note of distance. Okay, with the acoustics it will be less dry, but even so, it's not necessarily important to add such an extra 16th note just to separate them. They have to sort of collide or the fragments collide, but that's what he wanted. The modernity of his writing is not to make things stated one after the other, but put them in a contrast and in collision course. So you can hear for the second theme. So yes, you have residue resonance of the dominant into the subito piano tonic, as well as here. You don't hear the last A flat as much because you maintain it pianissimo. Because you produce that fortissimo subito at once. If you do a crescendo into it, you announce it. Hello, will be fortissimo the downbeat. So it becomes a crescendo into it, which is beautiful but wrong because he wanted a contrasting like Sturm und Drang, that storm and thunder. And the opposite in the second theme. So it's not just textures, it's not just orchestral instrumentation that could be put in contrast to imitate or to evoke on the piano keyboard. It's purely the energy of the sound, the deep, the speed of in which you put down the keys should be the same when you play the pianissimo deep in the keys fast. So that the contrasts, while being drastic between forte and piano, to say it simply, or less elaborately, there should be still a continuum. If you play them in the same dynamic range, you'll hear. So it's blunt, but you hear major, minor, Neapolitan, minor 6/4 dominant, and then the long trills. Again, the shakes rather than the embellishments. And then pianissimo. And all of it without crescendo until the storm. So yes, if it's only the contrasts, it will be like a film that has only special effects. As dramatic, as drastic, as unbelievably realistic as they are, if there is no plot, they become redundantly boring. In a way, we get tired of them or just too addicted to them, and therefore we need either more or we don't need any. But here there is a meaning to it. Where am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? Is this hope of major? Why do I start it in the Neapolitan flat 2? Am I going to go in major and it's dominant? Or am I staying in F minor? And then the repeated note, the knock of the perhaps fate on the door, like for the Fifth Symphony. Again, interruption, again, fragmentation. And then total swing change of mood. When you expect to hear the dominant being the forte. Downbeat, he gives you the forte on the weak, sixth degree. As if you say, I want to tell you. But to is not as important as tell. But the tell becomes important because the to was so strikingly overriding the dynamic. Right away. He does it later, but in the beginning he does it in minor. And the same thing with the second theme. When he's going to the anticlimactic forte or crescendo into mezzo forte and subito piano. Constantly manipulating the listeners psychologically so that we are always on the edge of our seat. What will happen? What was this? Why that? How come there? Oh, perhaps. Oh, it's not. And he gives you always fragments of hopes or of dramas, but the general lining is this dark color that we're doomed. That this sonata is about expressing the human nature trying to fight through the difficulty of the elements of life, of being, to prevail. That's very Beethoven's own motto, which was "Es muss sein." It must be. It has to become. It's the human will, the resolve. I mean, what more resolve than this? And when he does these repeated broken thirds, it reminds me of the repeated notes between the bridge of the first to the second theme, or the trill. or the repeated notes. So in his toolbox he has repeated notes, trills, and he has now broken thirds. He could have done, or he could have done a trill, but he alternates the different tools in his toolbox according to the way he wants it to be heard. For instance, the 16th notes that are organized, unlike a trill which is unmeasured by essence, at least in this style, here they are measured. And this kind of quick measurement is like almost as if they drop like flow, but they are organized. Two hands play 16th notes against each other, even very fast, but totally aligned. So it gives the sense of dramatic drive. It's like so much more than, let's say, arpeggios that would be in alternated hands. But this, it brings us to the point where after the second theme at the end of the exposition we want to get into the development. That is what he wants, and so he calms down. As he will end, he starts without introduction and he ends fading away, dying out. It's not even announcing some kind of closure to it or any kind of emphatic ending. He just disappears. When he starts a development, he starts in the left hand in E minor, the theme. Is an incredible statement of breaking with the rules of everything he had learned, or perhaps that he ignored, because what drives him in terms of his expectation of matching his inspiration rather than capping it by the formal knowledge of what he learned to do. I give you an example. Here he writes in sextuplets. And he doesn't do that arpeggio that follows in sextuplets. He almost does, but he does it in quintuplets, like a wobble that is even, because by essence 2 or 3 or 3 and 2, and it's kind of asymmetrical wobble instead of the symmetrical 6, which will be 2 and 3, 3 and 3. Many pianists with the pedal make it all blur into the same. The 6 and 2, almost 6. It's so clear in his writing, at least it's his notation, that he wants these quintuplets, and the last two beats are 6. A rhythmic accelerando that gives a sense of even faster drop into the next tonality. Did he want us to hear in their interpretation the difference that 6 make in that speed, which is fast tempo, compared to 5, which is not that much of a difference. If it was with 6 and 4, I understand it would be more a statement. After all, Bach did a lot of this with 2 and 4. When you have the half and the double. So you can have busy speaking and a listening becoming the speaker, and the speaker the listener. So it gives this dialogue in the inventions that is very organized, compared to having 6 and 5, and then 6 for 2 beats and 5. So if you put less pedal, you hear it more. If you put more pedal, you drown it, and it becomes all this big soup of sounds. Which comes to the mind, why didn't he after all think that it would be such a difference that would be unaudible? Might as well just write 6 everywhere in arpeggios. I like to joke with my students when I don't know how to explain the why of that, because this is the thing that makes a genius, and the others just the followers and trying to adapt, to imitate, to understand and to explain, but in a way we always one train behind. I think it's to say Beethoven told me that he wanted this to be heard to be this kind of asymmetrical wobble, but he didn't tell me asymmetrical wobble. But I think of it because it presents some kind of an important way to teach through image. And I like that because it also could be through what if he wrote 6. And then you hear the difference. It's a small difference, like in a foreign language, a diphthong, it's difficult to separate because the ear doesn't hear the difference as much as the natives. And same thing here, a quintolet compared to quintuplet, I think it's called, compared to the sextuplets, is lesser difference. But it is a difference. And in many aspects, I think that the problem often is that what the listener hears compared to what the performer can play with the technical facts that have to be solved, repeated notes, trills, tempo keeping, quintuplets, etc. And the original idea of the composer, who was a symphonist writing on a keyboard that had recently acquired the capacity of playing forte and piano, that is not just loud and soft, it's perhaps distant and close, it's perhaps driven and withdrawn. It's a lot of things that enter in the contrast than just the pure dynamics, but let's say for the sake of it that it is. Then you could say Beethoven didn't think about the comfort of the playing of it. He wanted to say, in a way, figure it out when you do play it. And when you play it, then you have to figure out how to play it in order not to betray what you think the composer wanted. Because by the time you add a 16th note to execute the subito piano, then you kill the effect that he wanted, regardless if it overlaps. And if you prepare the subito fortissimo, then you have to manage to make all of these indications of contrast within the tempo that he chose. Same thing with the repeated notes. That can be said for every piece, that the different technical problems have to be solved either creatively, either in a way that remain always to be defined. I find it very difficult to teach because if I teach my experience, the student doesn't have the experience. They have to build their own by essence. So I cannot make a time stretto. It cannot go faster. So they'll experiment it by themselves. Other thing is, I can say, be careful because, for instance, the end, as I like to say, there is a ritenuto no, but diminuendo yes. So if he wanted, as a composer, as he sometimes did, to give some kind of a closure, he would have, but he didn't. And many people like this little downbeat delay to just give it that closure that in a way disturbs us that he didn't. But if we try to play it like he really wanted, then we find it not perhaps conclusive enough. And this is where it's not just right or wrong, good edition, bad edition, listen to the teacher, contradict the teacher, or like it or hate it, or even change mind. It's about guidelines and tracks and rails. And if your teacher tells you, for instance, oh, it's okay to do a little bit something because it sort of ends it with a softer end, regardless what the words to explain, which anyway belittle every music just by saying it. But anyway, teaching is speaking, so therefore it belittles the music. But when you speak through your playing without the words, you hint that little mood change at the end. If not change, that mood calming. So today you're at this age, and then in a few years you replay it, and in a few years you record it, in a few later years you teach it, or perhaps you write an article about it, or a book about it, and you try to basically always revisit it to understand its duality, its quality, what it means, what it meant, what it could mean, how you can relate it to literature or to the other pieces he composed and become a well-read musician and all these things. But still remains the problem, how do you still end it? If you're a music scholar or just a beginner pianist, you're still facing the fact that you have to play what is written. Since it's only the written that connects us to the thought of the composer, we don't have his interpretation to compare or contrast or to justify. And I find that very fascinating, because if I encourage the student to do the little ritenuto, after several decades they're going to end up doing, and people say, oh, it's tradition, or it's supposed to be, but it's nicer, and then at some point somebody will look at it and say there's no written on that, so it should just stay. So it's not right to be in tempo, and it's not wrong to be out of tempo, and it's not right to be out of tempo, and it's not wrong to be in tempo. What it is, I think, and that's my conviction, is that you have to have a guideline. I don't want to make a ritenuto because I only want to finish diminuendo and fade and remain sort of suspended without conclusion after all these dramas of the first movement. There is no the dramatic didn't win over the more tender. It's the duality of the character of the human kind is there exposed, and with passion and drive, which is Appassionata. But it doesn't end with the fortissimo, it ends with the pianissimo. Fine. And if you still feel, yes, but I still feel I cannot not do something at the last note. If not, I feel like I don't bring that word, that sound, that syllable to its meaning, to its arrival point, then I agree, it shouldn't. But if you are used to and allowed to take the time, it's like the grooves. It will become always more and more, and you'll end up by not knowing why you do all these things. And if you're always strictly corseted and you're taught, no, not this, not that, not this, not that, he didn't say this, the publisher didn't say that, the teacher didn't say that, you end up by reciting something that doesn't correspond to you, because there is always nuance between things. It's not exactly only what is in the notation. There is in between the notes, in between the 60th notes, in between the 30 seconds. There is this little tiny portion of not liberty by itself, but it is freedom to express yourself through within the mood you want to express your belief. And I believe that an interpretation which becomes just a recitation of the teacher, publisher, or whatever other information, it's like a recitant. But if it becomes the narrator speaks, then it's the belief. And regardless if you can agree or disagree with it and say, I wouldn't have done that, but just the way it's done, then all of a sudden it sits well. But it's just the amount of delay that it would take, which is not even to be hinted, because if it's already said, it's too much. Hinted, not too many, not to mention. So these kind of things are not teachable, because there's the variables that are not objective. You can say yes rhythmically and with the metronome, or you count and you organize 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, or you sing the O mi la do la so si sa into solfeggio la 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 la. It's an arpeggio theme la 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 without accompaniment, so it's bare, and with the chords it's full. And once all teachers like I am speak about these things, and we describe them, we explain them, we teach them, we translate them to the students by the pianistic way of playing it, how to manage the different articulations that the instrument doesn't but rambunctiously give us a chance to do. So how to control it on any piano we would play, or let less on the one that we only like best. By the time you say all these things, you transmit all these things, you give the fingerings that you think is going to work better. Avoid the fourth finger is weak, or strengthen it in practice technique. But then before that, repeat notes. And if you repeat notes, avoid the thumb, because the thumb plays with the arm rather than with the palm. And the straight fingers, the vertical fingers are different from the horizontal finger unless you have articulation for it. Yes, you end up by finding ways that perhaps it helps the morphology of the performer, and the student has different morphology than yours as a teacher, and that's normal. And then the sound extraction and the imagination of the resonance, and then generally the whole architecture of the piece. And it's a sonata, it's a form within each form that is supposed to be alike, as Haydn organized it, to theme development recap. You have different moods, different characters of themes, or more or less different, with bridges that are more or less striking, with tempi that are more or less kept, in order to structurize the whole thing to hold, because after all it's a form that you play through a sonata. It's not just the mood, even if few of the sonatas, as I said in the beginning, are not only pure music, but have some kind of, like the Tempest, even if not named by him, or the Absence, the Return, the Departure, in Les Adieux, Les Bevols, program music, or pure music. And what was the music before the fortepiano? It was on the harpsichord, either dances with the suites of dances, Allemande Courante, Sarabande and all. And then, if not, it was arias, imitating on the harpsichord, on the keyboard, like an Italian concerto aria, or a dance. I mean, fugue. The fugue would be probably the, before sonata, the pure music form that expresses itself more than the mood that it carries itself to express. When one single mathematic material we call subject genetically, I was going to say, generates the same root, Latin root, its answer, its contra-subject in all the voices. It's like a tree out of one seed. Whenever the two-theme sonata form, I meant, at Haydn established to our knowledge, is to have contrasting two themes, almost like male and female, and then after the development create unity through the main tonality. So it's combining opposites versus creating a universe out of a single seed or cell. And I think in both cases, the fugue and the sonata are ways to organize, especially for the keyboard, for the sonata and the fugue, but for the earlier keyboard, harpsichord and organ, were the two ways to write pure music, regardless of the mood. Of course, there is a tainted situation with the tonality, the modality, the minor, the major, or the half minor with the ascending minor major. But progressively into romantic, into modern, into even atonal almost, the colorization of the mood through the tonality and modality of it, or at least the way you present it, brings more to talk about through itself about what is the intent. You cannot write a funeral march in major unless you're really cynical. So obviously it will be in minor because it's supposed to be grieving. So obviously if you write a fugue in minor or major, you don't say in advance if it's a funeral fugue or if it's a wedding fugue. It doesn't matter. The canon is a canon, the contrapoint is a contrapoint. It's about combinations of tension and releases. When you hear Gregorian, or you hear birds, mass, minor, but it doesn't sound as minor as the F minor of the Appassionata, nor does it sound the first sonata. So I think that, if Chopin writes something in minor, it's obviously not in major. You cannot do. Obviously, it's ridiculous. It's within out of mind. But if you play, the motion is more meaningful than the emotion, if I may say. And so I think in ways the music becomes, in the Romantic era, 19th century, into modern, disconnected from its form into only its mood. And then at some point with the atonalism, it gets even disconnected from its mood to become only its brain. And without tonal centered, without tension release. As if music is searching to be the translation of the inner world of people's lives, either through longing as poets for love or for death or hope or liberty, and then they write poems, or they write symphonies, or they write novels. But when they don't have that longing, then perhaps it changes in the character and it becomes something of a different form of art that can come with a different type of civilization in which people live, with the immediacy of today compared to the expectation of the past. And when we play music of the past today, I think it's like revisiting it, but in their own present. So when I play this Beethoven sonata today, I don't feel, my God, I'm in the 1800s, like in a museum. It talks to me as directly as the mood, the psychology of it, as if I am in that anguish, in that expectation, in that anger, in that hope, in that excitement, in that expectation, in that scream, or in that rising of hope. So I think it's all about human nature and how the human nature evolves when it's shocked by the events, would it be cosmic events or human-made events, but it is wars, eclipses, tsunamis, end of civilizations because of a meteorite, or a species ending and all that, at such levels of humanity that the 99 years between Bach's death and Chopin's death seem to be just nothing in that sense. But at the same time, within that, you have such an evolution of the way humans express their anguish, their expectation, their dramatic, in fact, their being. And when we play there, I don't feel like we are entering, and I hope that my students also don't feel like we're trying to revisit them in their context, because we're not there, neither the instrument, neither our lives around. But the message of it is universal more than the messenger that is the piece. It can evolve in interpretations, it can involve in instrumental choices, if you play it on original instruments or not. But the message of it that is touching our hearts and our souls and our, is the one that remains universal. And I find it fascinating, because then you feel like an archaeologist in real time, a futurologist in real time. You try to understand the audacity of a dissonance, or the audacity of a contrast in comparison to what today would be considered nothing or less. The dissonance of yesterday becoming the consonance of tomorrow, as Mademoiselle Boulanger, my teacher, used to say. All these things cook inside the brain. And the brain is a powerful and lethal, sometimes very, or sometimes mostly very nice, well-making for humanity things, from science for human health to destruction through human war. But it's related to the psychology, and the psychology, the way psyche, as the Greeks said, for the soul. The music is, in a way, a language that, beyond the individual cultures, languages, and beyond the time periods, talks directly to our deep-rooted humanity and duality within the humanity, which goes with it, without to say. In a way, You don't need words to express a mood. Sometimes just a gaze is enough to be clear about what is your mood and to be perceptive by the other. But if you have to say something, you have to have the right vocabulary, like a fugue in music. You have to have contrapoint. But the mood doesn't need that. It just an atmosphere. You can create it with one note even, major or minor, and you know it, and all of a sudden you feel it. Perhaps you misguidedly believe it is this or that, and you can relearn it differently, and perhaps revisit it and say, oh, I thought so, but in fact I was wrong. I think it's rather this, and you dig deep into trying to find it. And that quest is the passion itself, Appassionata. It's all about passion, isn't it? From pain to drive to meaning to relentless search for the humanity in us. I think that's what it is, the relentless search for the humanity in us. It's weird how a few notes of music written by somebody dead years ago can make us go, like I just did, to start thinking philosophically, even if I'm not, of course, a philosopher, far from there. But I think music is its own language that allows to have the mind divagate in all directions like that. Well, thank you.